Ohio Citizen Action. They do a lot of canvassing and campaigning work in a lot of these rural Ohio communities. So we rub
Oh,
shoulders quite a bit. So that's kind of the connection here.
cool.
And we're
Sounds
doing
awesome.
like a Ohio Citizen Action's doing a webinar series where we're trying to get people from all different parts of like utility scale solar and explain it because there's just so many parts that like I feel like even someone who works in it will learn from like every presentation. And our next one's going to be on like unions.
Hmm. Have
Exciting.
you, so do you have a solar company presenting at some point soon?
We don't necessarily like work with developers as much, like publicly. I mean, Bella, you can answer that better.
Well, I meant
The,
just to remember like the components of the solar side, or explain solar development, I guess. That's kind
yeah,
of what I thought you
that's
meant.
a good idea. What we decided is we're going to do coalition partners first. So we're in a non-public facing coalition. But that is a great idea, Kevin, to get them to talk about. I mean, because eventually I do want to have a webinar on the pilot program itself. And I don't know if, unless we can get like the commissioner, hmm, that one that's near Fox Squirrel to do it, because he's like a big advocate for that as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, there's some pretty good developers and some good folks with some of those in the space that would be happy to. And they'd probably even do a good job of getting the context. Like, we know we're not the most popular, but we have a lot of context and insight on this.
You
Yeah.
should you should
Great.
try and get I was gonna say you should try and get Sam Sawmiller from Savion. I think Sam, have you met her before?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's
I'm actively
I
really
love
trying
Sam.
to
Sam is a good friend
yeah.
of ours. She's a badass.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just get her to do it. She'll be
Sam would
fine.
be great, yeah.
I had the pleasure of working with her when she was working for Open Roads in Logan
Yeah.
and Knox County. Yeah. And Craig O'Dare and Dan Check used to show up to like every trustee and commissioner meeting and just answer anyone's question, any questions anybody from the crowd had. And that really helped build like community
Yeah.
trust.
Okay, I'm gonna start admitting people, and also someone emailed me asking for the link, so that's why I went quiet for a second. So I'm gonna start admitting.
Welcome, folks. We're just going to take a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. As more people are joining, we're gonna wait until 6:04 to start. Just give those late people a minute to check in and not miss any important information. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're gonna get started at 6:04. Thank you so much for your patience. In the meantime, if you'd like, please drop in the chat your name and where you're calling us in from. I and Joe will be moderating the chat, so if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them while the presentation is going, and then there'll be a short question answer session afterwards as well. All right, Joe and Sam, take it away. Oh, sorry. Yep, Joe and Sam, take it away. Thank you.
Hi, I want to thank everyone for joining the Ohio Citizen Action webinar along with Farm to Power and the American Solar Grazing Center. And so I'm really excited to open the floor to Sam.
Hi, everyone. Sam Roberts here. I am the Ohio State Director for Farm to Power. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, pull my presentation up. I'm going to be kind of kicking things off here this webinar, giving you a two-part presentation, both on starting with, I should say, Farm to Power 101, just kind of talking about, what we are, who we are, where we are, why we are. And then the second part of the presentation, I'll be talking about agrivoltaics here in Ohio. And I do want to give that context because, most of my understanding of agrivoltaics is based out of, context that I've gotten out of here in Ohio. So you can apply some of this to the Midwest, but agrivoltaics is all across the country and the world at this point. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into things here. So what is Farm to Power? Farm to Power is a nonpartisan, nonprofit community that supports rural Americans and their right to make choices that sustain economic opportunities and stable futures. We are building a community of farmers, ranchers out west, growers, ag producers, and rural community voices willing to take a stand to support clean energy projects and use their voices and platforms to encourage others in the ag community to do the same. We are working to create a community of support and preserve the role that farmers, ranchers, and growers have played in meeting America's energy needs for the last 100 years. So we're really just trying to push back on a lot of the tension and misinformation in rural America right now regarding renewable energy projects. I'm assuming that most likely everyone here is at least somewhat familiar with a lot of that tension in rural America. If you've ever driven past a cornfield in certain communities, but yeah, there's a lot of it right now, and we really want to kind of create a medium and space that is supportive for these rural community voices and farmers, because there's a lot of harassment happening in that kind of space, and we want to prevent farmers and landowners from essentially getting chewed up and spit out by their own communities for engaging in some of these situations. And I also really want to emphasize the context of this sentence on the slide here, and that, rural landowners and farmers and ranchers, they've always been at the front lines of energy development. They've always played a huge role in meeting America's energy needs. They're the landowners, so that's where we need to develop these projects at. And there's a lot of responsibility with that. Oftentimes they are, you can ask any of them, they are stewards of their land, and they often know what's best for their land. So we want to support their ability to kind of have a say in those decision-making contexts with these kind of energy development processes. So kind of moving on to where we are as an organization. Again, I'm the Ohio State Director for Farm to Power. In the Midwest, we're also active in Michigan, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And then in the Southwest, we're active in Arizona, New Mexico. And then while we don't have any field teams in Colorado and Kansas, we do still have a presence there. We still have some communities of supporters that we've interacted with in the past. Now moving on to kind of, why do we exist? Why were we formed as an organization? At Farm to Power, we firmly believe that agricultural operations can coexist beneficially with renewable energy, and that building more clean energy projects is key to securing a stable energy and economic future for our country. So, kind of like that image on the slide shows, agricultural operations and renewable energy can literally coexist via agrivoltaics. And again, I'll get into that. But I also just kind of want to talk on the importance of how you don't necessarily need agrivoltaics to still allow agricultural operations and markets to coexist beneficially with renewable energy. And what I mean by that is that there is a pretty large misconception in a lot of rural America where there is a lot of this tension brewing up that these solar and wind projects are taking up every single last square foot and acreage of all farmland in America. And that's just not outright true. To be fair to them, there are some rural communities that they are facing a lot of renewable energy development and pressure. And for them, it might be upwards of 5 to 10% of their total ag land that's getting taken out of portfolio. But I know that there are some projections. I don't know if it came out of NREL or which college or university, so I don't want to misquote them. But I know that there's projections that have stated that we can meet American energy needs and we can meet like energy independence as a country with only like 2 to 4% of our nation's farmland portfolio. We have a lot of land in this country, and we don't need absolutely all of it to develop wind and solar projects. So kind of moving on to, some of the political and legal reasons why we exist. We're seeing across the board an increase in state and local governments pushing to regulate new wind and solar development, taking away rural Americans' rights to make decisions about their own land. Now, this is particularly true here in Ohio. And I'm sure that OCA folks are definitely aware of what I'm talking about here. But in 2022, Ohio State's legislature passed Senate Bill 52, which gave home rule power to county level commissioners and trustees to allow them to enact outright total bans on utility scale wind and solar development. And since that passing of Senate Bill 52, over a quarter of our Ohio's 88 counties have done exactly that and passed outright bans of farmers' ability to develop utility scale wind and solar development. And, so these farmers, they're allowed to develop transmission and distribution for a lot of projects. They're allowed to frack on their property. They're allowed to, drill an oil well, but they're not allowed to lease their land out for utility scale wind and solar. And if that kind of smells like an infringement on folks' property rights, it's because it is. It literally is. So that's another reason that we exist. We're really trying to push back on a lot of these situations that are unfolding. And lastly, on why we exist, we're seeking to close the information gap by sharing factual information, elevating rural American voices, and advocating for their interests in the context of energy conservation and the benefits these projects offer to individual landowners in their communities. So again, these farmers are at the front lines. Their voices really matter, and we're just seeing so much tension growing up in these communities that folks aren't feeling comfortable kind of stepping forward and kind of advocating on not only their own rights, but on their neighbors' rights. We've talked to so many farmers here in Ohio that say that just outright their neighbors, their cousins, their aunts, their uncles won't talk to them anymore because they lease some of their land out for a solar project. That's not okay with us, and we desperately want to kind of prevent that. So at Farm to Power, our guiding principles, we believe in the importance of investing in energy that's made in America for America. Simply put, energy independence as a country is a national security concern. America does rely on a lot of different foreign entities to meet a lot of its energy needs. And it would be great if we could develop more American-made clean energy that's by America and for America. It would also, be great to diversify our energy portfolio. We also believe in the importance of defending the rights of American farmers and ranchers to do what they want with their land and for their community. I mean, a lot of this just comes down to the importance of defending Americans' property rights in these kinds of situations, because as I've already pointed out, in some states more than others, like ours especially, those property rights are on the chopping block. At Farm to Power, we believe in the importance of preserving America's agricultural lands for future generations. So many farmers that we interact with, it's no secret that they are struggling financially. Their backs are against the wall, and many times. And for a lot of these farmers, they're working on, third, fourth, fifth, nth generational land that's been in their family for those amount of generations. And oftentimes it's like a single kid that doesn't have any other kids coming along the way, or they're not totally sure if they want to continue farming on that family land, but they desperately want to maintain that land in their family for future generations. And sometimes these solar and wind leases are the only option that they have to preserve that land for those future generations. And lastly, we believe in strengthening rural landowners' long-held position as community leaders in decisions about smart land use. Again, farmers, they know quite a bit about their land, as you can imagine, and we really want to maintain their ability and their role in interacting with, developers and municipalities in some of these energy discussions to make sure that what is being done on their land and in their community is smart. they should have a lot of sway in that, and they do, and they will if we support them more in these situations. So our approach at Farm to Power, we deploy, a variety of strategies and tactics to kind of achieve our strategic priorities. At the grass tops level, that's more of at my level as a state director. I work with a lot of organizations and representatives of them to secure partnerships and build credibility within those networks. So Farm to Power, we are primarily advocacy org for agriculture, and then I would say secondarily for renewable energy. So within the grass tops networking, I work a lot with, or at least try to work a lot with, a lot of the ag organizations in the space. So attending Farm Bureau conferences, attending Ohio Ag Council meetings, sponsoring and tabling at, county fairs, sponsoring and tabling at farmers markets, attending and talking on webinars like this. We do quite a bit at the grass tops level to kind of just interact with anybody and everybody in the ag space and kind of build that credibility with them. We want to be an educational resource for them and a thought leader in this space. At the digital advocacy level, y'all should definitely check out our website and social media pages. This is where we're able to kind of recruit advocates, highlight a lot of our farmer testimonials that we collect, and then push back on misinformation. It's not fun to spend a lot of time in the Facebook comments section of like a big solar project post. But our digital media coordinator, Holly, she does a really good job of politely pushing back on so much of the misinformation that you will see in those forums. And again, it's not fun to be hanging around there, but in 2025, that is a lot of where these interactions are happening nowadays on these kinds of topics. So, if that's where we need to go have these conversations, that's where we'll go have these conversations. And then at the grassroots level, this is where we're working to develop a surrogate community of farmers, ranchers, and rural landowners. This is where our field organizers in each state will literally go and interact with these farmers and rural landowners and collect their stories and testimonials that they then will kind of process and work with those farmers and landowners to package and then ultimately publish onto our website and social media pages. Our field organizers are also doing a lot of the same work that you'll see OCA organizers doing, attending some public hearings and saying some words sometime, or, calling some of our farmer supporters and also encouraging them to maybe write a letter to the editor or also attend some of these public hearings. This next slide here kind of summarizes a lot of what I just said, but again, we conduct outreach to both individual rural landowners and agriculturally focused organizations to develop a robust community that can help collectively raise rural voice in the energy conversation. And again, you can just find us at a variety of different events and conferences and mediums, across the country and across our states. So I should have given a little more detail on this, but again, our main form of advocacy at Farm to Power is collecting farmer testimonials and publishing them on our website and social media pages. As a C3 organization, we're not doing any lobbying, so we're primarily just doing educational outreach and collecting and amplifying these positive stories from farmers and landowners about renewable energy. We're currently doing this across our 6 active states, and here's a perfect example from a Wisconsin dairy farmer. She talks about how most farmers go into debt to prepare for the next year, and with that, if you don't have money to cover it, or if you're losing money, then you have to figure out how you're going to cover that debt. And that these renewable projects offer a way out for so many farmers. At this point, we almost call this like a savior story because we just hear this so much. These farmers, they're kind of out of options, and farmers have to get pretty kind of innovative and creative with how they maintain financial security. And again, I can't stress this enough. These renewable projects are life-saving leases a lot of the time. Another example, this is from an Ohio solar grazer, one of our farmers out of the southwest kind of Hillsboro part of Ohio. Brady says that not only does solar grazing have the potential to further strengthen local ag economies involved with renewable projects, but it can also be massively beneficial to the overall health of the land and soil utilized by these projects. So again, I wanted to show you some diversity in testimonials to show how we're really trying to provide a unified voice in the rural energy conversation. Whether folks are talking about the importance of the financial implications of these renewable projects for their own pocket or their community's pocket, or they're talking about ecological implications, or they're talking about the importance of property rights, or they're talking about the importance to them of energy independence and energy diversification. There's a myriad of reasons why folks in rural America support these things, and we want to show those reasons. And lastly here, this is really just kind of the crux of a lot of our work and a lot of what we're trying to get out there because this message just resonates so much with people. But this is from Christy Rhodes out of Delaware, Ohio. She was involved with the Samsung project out of Union County, which ultimately did go under. But she says, isn't it our right to do with our land as property owners as we see fit? And again, that's just kind of what it all comes down to. It's just the importance of farmers' property rights to do with their land as they see fit. So, our ask at Farm to Power is just to, especially from this webinar, just connect with us. If you're a farmer or a rural landowner, or you know any folks that are, check out our website and social media pages. Maybe sign our online petition. Again, we're really just trying to develop a community of support, and our vision is to create this community of support that ultimately empowers more grassroots level advocacy in the energy conversation. We're happy to be that medium for as long as we need to be. We're happy to help uplift these voices. But I guess in our mind, if we've done everything right in the future, then we would love to see a rural America where folks don't need to utilize farm to power. They already just feel comfortable enough to speak out on these things that they're seeing in their communities. So that's it on the Farm to Power 101 section of the presentation. I'm now going to be going into kind of agrivoltaics. And again, agrivoltaics here in Ohio, because this is most of the examples I have are out of Ohio. But you could apply this to a lot of the Midwest geography. But as you can imagine, the geography across the world and across the US will very much define what kind of dual use agricultural implementations you can do with a solar project. But through this part of this presentation, I'm just going to be talking on some of the example applications, and then some of the challenges that farmers and folks are facing, and then some of the implicated benefits that we're going to be seeing with agrivoltaics. So to start, kind of going over some of the applications here in Ohio. There's several Ohio farmers, developers, and research entities experimenting with agrivoltaics. And for the purposes of this presentation, I've abbreviated that throughout to AgPVs. These applications include solar grazing, row cropping and co-location with panels and commodity crops, using cover crops, especially vegetable crops, and then things like pollinator habitats and apiaries. And I will give a slight distinction that sometimes you will see the implementation of like pollinator habitats and apiaries as more of like ecovoltaics, because it's not necessarily just direct agricultural production, whereas it's still a dual use of the land, but it's not necessarily creating ag products. I guess apiaries would be considered under that. But that's more of a pedantic distinction. But if you do hear the term ecovoltaics, that's often what they're referring to, as opposed to agrivoltaics. The picture here, I already showed Brady's testimonial earlier, but that's him and his wife, and they run a business out of Ohio called Ohio Solar Grazing, and it's essentially set up as a vegetation management company. They act as like third-party businesses that work with solar sites to essentially be organic mowers with their sheep flocks, if you will. This next slide here, I'm not going to try to play this video just because I know that audio output with over like a virtual medium can be kind of wonky, but it's really just a screenshot of another solar grazer here in Ohio, Mr. Cameron Meyerly with Meyerly Sheep Co. And he's also the director of sustainability for the American Land Board. He's out of the Northeast Ohio part of the state. And he has a contract with Oberlin College where he's grazing some sheep. And I know that he's interested in trying to get some utility scale contracts set up. In fact, our other presenter here tonight, Kevin, may have some more insight on that because I apologize. I actually haven't talked to Cameron about that in a while. But both Cameron and then Brady and Amanda, they're all part of American Solar Grazing Association, which again is the presenter that we have after myself tonight. But they're all working to kind of, really to kind of define the space at the moment of what agrivoltaics and sheep grazing can look like on these solar sites. And then another example application that we have here in Ohio is in Madison County, in London, Ohio. This is the Between the Rows project, and this is at the utility scale level. This is in conjunction with OSU's College of Ag, Food, and Environmental Science, and this is through the developer Savion. I apologize, I don't actually know how to pronounce their name at this point. But this is really cool because it actually shows, rather than livestock grazing, row cropping applications, which at this point is, at least in Ohio, not quite as done or not quite as seen as much, for a variety of reasons, which we'll kind of get into those reasons, via the challenges and benefits of agrivoltaics. But they're actively working at that project site. I think it's like 1,200 acres that they are utilizing 180 of those acres to do a variety of different cool season forage crop, cover crop, and row crop productions. Just some more photos of that project site because I was fortunate enough to get a tour of this project site back in April. But on the left side of the picture, you can see, just example of some of those 180 acres of solar panel rows, where they're planning a variety of different seed density test plots. And then those exact test plots you can see on the right-hand pictures. And again, they're really just dealing with like cool season forage crops, just like hay and teff varieties. But also at that site, they're playing around with a variety of different cool things. They got a donation from Chipotle restaurants to grow some specialty vegetable crops. I want to emphasize it's not a contract. They're really just kind of doing some proof of concept stuff just to kind of play around with seeing, can you grow a bunch of specialty vegetable crops in Madison County, Ohio, under solar panels? They also have a collaboration with the Jim Beam Institute of Technology at the University of Kentucky to grow a couple plots of corn to make some corn mash for some quote unquote solar whiskey. I'm just mentioning all this to show you that we are at a really cool, kind of innovative point of agrivoltaics, and people are trying to do a variety of cool stuff within the space. So those are the example applications of agrivoltaics here in Ohio. As you can imagine, there's a variety of different challenges with implementation with them. Again, we're at a very novel point with these kinds of things, and we're trying to figure out, the best ways to, design them and deploy them and scale them. And those are the main challenges I'm going to be talking about today. So the deployability challenges arise when assessing local ag markets and possible agrivoltaic applications, and when these projects face pushback in the communities they're proposed in. So what I mean by deployability challenges kind of arising when assessing local ag markets, simply put, if you're trying to develop a solar project and you're trying to get a dual use model on that solar site where you're trying to get some kind of agricultural production, you need to kind of see what is the local geography good for and what are the local ag markets already producing. So for example, there's a lot of solar and wind pressure here in Northwest Ohio. But there's not quite as much sheep grazing going on up there. So, there's a real want for solar grazing in some of these sites where these solar sites are being put into, but there's not too many, actual sheep farmers in the county or bi-county region. So again, that's a pretty obvious challenge when it comes to trying to get a dual use model on that land if there's not an actual market for that agricultural production already in place in that area. And then another obvious issue with deployability kind of arises when, simply put, these projects face pushback in the communities they're proposed in. It's pretty hard to get a dual use agrivoltaic model on a solar site in a community that doesn't even want that solar site there to begin with. Another major challenge with implementations of agrivoltaics is scalability. It's one thing to graze sheep alongside 12 acres of panels on like a university or college setting, and it's another thing to scale that to like a 1,200 acre site. Simply put, utility scale solar does take a lot of acreage of solar to utilize, and it's kind of difficult, or rather, we don't even have enough sheep to graze along all of that. But that being said, we're also trying to, show proof of concept with a variety of other livestock grazing operations, like, cattle grazing or like swine grazing. So at the moment, again, as we're in this novel period of agrivoltaics, there's a problem with kind of scaling up, the amount of sheep that is needed for one of these utility scale solar sites. And the last thing I'll say on sheep is that it's also interesting how America doesn't have quite as much of a culture for sheep. For sheep and goat being like the number one consumed protein across the globe, U.S. citizens don't quite have as much of a culture for it. And one thing I really appreciate about ASGA or American Solar Grazing Association is that they also kind of advocate in those kinds of situations just on, the importance of let's try to develop a better, sheep market here in America, which I absolutely agree with. Let's try to get more organic American industry going. But I also want to talk about scalability when it comes to like doing something like row cropping. Again, if you're going to install row crops on a solar site, you're going to need to kind of mess with the design of that solar site and the overall parameters of those solar arrays. You're going to need to kind of like increase the width between those rows of panels to allow space for like a combine harvester to drive down and actually harvest the row crop that you're planting. You're also going to need to increase, the distance between the end of those rows and those perimeter fencing, sorry, to allow enough space for the combine harvester to actually like, lap around the edge of a row panel and go into the other side. A lot of these different things that need to happen for row cropping on a solar site, might not be as affordable for developers at the moment. So there's a lot of considerations that comes into these things, especially for developers, because they're also trying to make money off these project sites. And if you need to alter or, reduce the amount of production value or overall efficacy of that solar site to incorporate agriculture, that's a big consideration for these developers themselves. And the last challenge I want to talk on, and I was already kind of getting into this last slide here, is just simply put, project design is another major challenge to getting these agrivoltaics sites launched. Often these solar farms aren't designed with agrivoltaic applications in mind, and they don't account for running machinery and agricultural implements throughout the project site. Two perfect examples, and this is from that same solar site in Madison Fields, or in Madison County at the Madison Fields site. But the top left and right picture here just show, a cable of wires hanging across the middle of the row of those solar panels. And this is actually on the agrivoltaics dual use site. And I remember when I was there, I was asking him, like, well, what does the tractor or combine harvester actually do when they get to that cable of wiring? And they say that they just kind of drive right up to it and then have to reverse all the way back and loop back around and go around the other side. That's one just very straightforward design flaw that these developers could have more thoughtfulness when it comes to designing these things to allow for these dual use models. But there's a variety of different design challenges. Again, just like the amount of spacing between the panels themselves, the ability or access to like things like water on the site. Something that I would encourage most developers to do at this point is to just like automatically assume to install like agricultural paddock fencing and gate fencing to allow for future sheep flocks to kind of move around the project site more freely. Because there's such a want for these things that it kind of just behooves developers at this point just to kind of prepare for these dual use models. But again, at the moment, most of these solar farms are not designed for these agricultural purposes in mind. So it's important to kind of encourage them to make them designed for these purposes in mind. So I've talked enough about, the challenges, but there's also a variety of benefits that agrivoltaics can bring. One of the most straightforward benefits is just simply put being the dual or multi-use component in its ability to keep agricultural land in production. Especially from our point of view at Farm to Power, as just kind of trying to be a general purpose ground softening advocacy organization for these kinds of situations in rural America. Folks desperately want to know that the land isn't just getting covered in solar panels and that it is still getting an agricultural production component out of it. I know that universities have already demonstrated through social sciences and surveying that agrivoltaics do make these wind and solar projects more digestible to the communities that they're proposed in. And, it's kind of a no-brainer, If any of you are from rural America, you know the importance of small town culture and kind of maintaining that kind of culture. So that's probably the most straightforward benefit that you can imagine is that these dual use models are more attractive to the folks to the folks in the communities that they're being proposed in. Another major benefit is that, the multi-use of this agricultural land or agrivoltaics, not only provides additional financial benefits for the farmer maintaining the land and the community receiving the substantial tax revenues, which, is quite a bit. If any of you aren't aware, like for some of these utility scale renewable projects, it's like millions of dollars annually that's going to these very, very rural Ohio communities, which could desperately use the funding. But these dual use models can also reduce a primary operating expense for the project developer, which is vegetation management. One of the main reasons that we're seeing so much solar and wind pressure is because these projects and these sites aren't that hard to deploy. And once you actually get the sites built, you don't really need too much of ongoing operation on that site. They're going to have a few technicians out there kind of keeping an eye on the arrays and making sure that everything is working properly from a hardware point of view. But other than that, one of the main operating expenses that these developers have is just mowing the entire site to make sure that the weeds and vegetation doesn't get out of control. If they can take that job or that expense and kind of shift it over to a solar grazer who would be happy to get access to that kind of land to graze their flock on, that's one of their biggest operating expense moving forward from that project. They would be happy to. So there's financial implications and win-win-wins across the board here when you look at agrivoltaic operations. And lastly, another major benefit is the implication of soil health improvements. I'm excited to see the continued research coming out from OSU as they are showing kind of, the longitudinal kind of data of soil health effects on that utility scale solar site in Madison County, because I'm interested in What does the overall soil compaction look like over time? What does the nutritional density of the soil look like over time after being kind of put to fallow for a while or having a variety of cover crop rotations on it? But simply put, letting land that has been conventionally farmed for decades go to fallow for 10 to 30 years can drastically improve that land's overall health. A lot of how we do big macro ag in America is not as sustainable and regenerative as it could be without getting too far into the weeds. And oftentimes it is kind of mining the soil of its nutrients. And that is where a lot of these solar sites are being put up on. So if you can just let some of that land that's really just kind of been farmed to death, just sit there for 10 to 30 years, you can improve that soil health. And then when you incorporate things like rotational cover crops or pollinator habitats or sheep grazing and apiaries, as you can imagine, those conditions can only improve further. So just to kind of wrap off my whole presentation here and kind of my talk on agrivoltaics, it's an exciting new field, and to make them work, we need farmers working directly with project developers to design and implement them. Nobody knows their land better than that farmer, and that's what we at Farm to Power are trying to highlight and advocate for. Pressure for solar development isn't going to stop, so let's support farmers and landowners as they navigate this space to find those best practices. The only last thing I want to plug here is that like I was saying earlier in this presentation, across the board, we're always doing educational outreach and programming. And I just want to plug this cool agrivoltaics workshop that's happening in Southeast Ohio, in the Athens area near Ohio University. This is from one of our partner organizations, Rural Action, that just kind of is also a general purpose advocacy org for rural Ohio and Appalachian states. And they're also trying to learn more about and develop more programming on agrivoltaics, like a lot of entities are right now. So this is an in-person workshop, or you can join it virtually. And if any of you would like the link, I'm sure I can blast it out. But simply put, just Google Rural Action Agrivoltaics, and you'll no matter what be able to find it. But that's it for me. I'm now going to be handing it over to Kevin Richardson with ASGA.
Hey folks, thanks for that presentation, Sam. That was really great and really informative. I'm going to do a quick screen share and give you a little introduction to ASGA and the world of solar sheep grazing, or just solar grazing as we call it. So let me pull up my slides. Cool. Sam mentioned, my name is Kevin Richardson. I'm the Senior Director of the American Solar Grazing Association. I'm based in the Philadelphia area, but we are a national org, a trade association, 501(c)(6), with the membership of pretty much all of the farmers who call themselves solar grazers, who are grazing sheep on solar sites throughout the country, as well as all the farmers who are wanting to become solar grazers, who are learning how to do that effectively and how to get contracts with solar companies. And we also work with the solar industry too, since we kind of have to educate both sides of that coin in order for those partnerships to work. But our primary focus is on the farmers. We're a farmer-led and farmer-founded organization, started around 2018-ish by the first couple of folks who had sheep and saw solar sites nearby and thought, hey, that looks like good pasture for my sheep. I wonder what happened if I put the sheep on there. Would the company let me do that? And figured out that whole process of how do you put sheep on a solar site? How do you use sheep to manage vegetation? And then started talking to each other about that, experimenting, learning the kind of the do's and don'ts, and then created a website, and then we built a membership network to teach that information nationwide. As that's what ASGA has become. We have about over 1,200 members. I think we're up to actually probably up to 1,300. I haven't checked today. Throughout the country, most of those are farmers. Some of those are enthusiasts, like supporters who are just interested in the idea, or researchers, nonprofit folks. And then we also have a number of solar companies that also join ASGA's corporate members to help support things. But we're always farmer first. We're not here to promote solar energy. We're here to promote solar grazing and support the farmers who are doing it, and also other forms of agrivoltaics too. But the core of what we've always done is creating the best practices for the industry and the standards for the solar grazing industry, how to do it best. And then we provide technical assistance to farmers and to a lesser degree solar companies about answering questions about implementation. And then we provide a lot of education through our network. We do educational webinars about 3 or 4 times a month. We record those and then put those out with other resources on our ASGA network for people to access. And that allows them to learn kind of any question they have about solar grazing. We've probably answered at some point through our resources. And then in the last 2 years, we've launched a training program in person. First for farmers who want to become solar grazers, and we do about 8 of those per year. The get about 30 people from around the country in different parts of the country. 30 people at each workshop, teach them the basics of solar grazing, and they get certification. And this year we launched that same kind of program for solar company employees. And it's like a 1 day workshop to give them a crash course. And we call it what to expect when you're expecting sheep. So what they should expect when sheep are going to be on their site, managing vegetation and how to create sort of enduring partnerships with farmers. And actually, I'm in Virginia today because we're going to teach one of those classes tomorrow. And those are a lot of fun too. But yeah, that's the kind of the core of what we've done, but we've also been heavily involved in all the agrivoltaics research, especially the initial solar grazing research that proved it was effective and worked well. And then we spent a lot of time promoting solar grazing, educating folks about it, trying to speak to the broader public as well as the solar industry. And I'll put in the chat, we have a short documentary since you guys are in Ohio. It's playing at the Chagrin Documentary Film Festival in Ohio, Chagrin Falls, Ohio, which is, I think, around October 9th, 10th, and 12th. It's playing several days, so check that out. It's called Pastures and Panels. It's only about 20 minutes long, but it's a great story of kind of the impact of solar grazing and how it can save the family farm. And then we also have a short 5-minute video about Texas solar grazing, which you can watch on YouTube now. So I encourage you guys to check those out. They're pretty cool. And as part of promoting solar grazing, I think what's really interesting is trying to bring these two worlds together, agriculture and solar energy. So these pictures are from 2 weeks ago. We went to RE Plus, which is the biggest renewable energy conference, I think, in the world, definitely in the United States, in Las Vegas. And we brought sheep. We brought a display with live sheep under a solar panel tracking system. And there's about 40,000 people attend that conference, got pretty much all of them to come and see what live sheep look like in order to sort of give them a hands-on demonstration and like a sense of, the kind of impact of what this can do if they have projects and add agrivoltaics to it. And it was a huge success. This is the second year we've done that. The first year was Anaheim, and second year was in Vegas, inside the Venetian Convention Center. So we brought sheep to Vegas and then inside one of the resorts there. And it was a lot of fun. And that's a great way to educate the industry on the importance of solar grazing and the importance of agriculture, especially since many of these folks have never really seen live farm animals except at a state fair, or maybe they go to like a U-Pick or something like that. So really great stuff. And so we try to do more of this kind of activity to help spread the benefits of agriculture and agrivoltaics. So what is solar grazing? So Sam kind of gave you a pretty good overview of it. I'm just going to dive deeper, and excuse the pun, into the weeds a little bit about it and give you kind of more of a sense of the technical aspects of it. So at its core, solar grazing is a really innovative way to combine agricultural production and solar energy production. And that's, the whole basis of agrivoltaics. It's a really unique opportunity that happens to be that solar takes land or requires land, and you can actually have space to do agriculture under it, which is amazing. So the sheep producers produce protein in the form of lamb and to a lesser extent wool. And if you want us to get into that, I'm happy to talk about during the Q&A about the wool stuff. It's great fiber, but less produced in the United States than it used to be. And the reason why this exists is you can use sheep to manage vegetation, which means, there's a whole bunch of solar sites, some of them very big, some of them very small. You have to mow them, or you have to control vegetation somehow. And it just so happens that sheep are browsers. They eat a lot of different types of vegetation, and you can use them pretty effectively to control vegetation on a solar site. And the reason you have to control vegetation is if it grows too tall, it'll shade the panels, which will block the energy production or shut down entire rows of panels. Or especially in western or southern states, all that all the grass under the panels, once it dries out, becomes a huge fire load. So in California in particular, you use sheep to mitigate or prevent fire risk on solar sites, which is a really important part of the industry. It's a requirement oftentimes by the insurers for the company to insure solar sites. And you can't build a solar site without insurance. So this is kind of a huge part of the economic motivation on the solar side for sheep grazing on the sites. And it so happens that, it's rare in human history or life where you get such a perfect marriage of two things that coincidentally worked well together. And sheep just happen to be perfectly suited for solar sites as they're built now. They're small in terms of they fit under the panels. So it just happens to be the solar panels are the right height for the most part, even those that are kind of lower to the ground than we'd like. The sheep work really well under it. As I said, sheep are really effective at controlling vegetation, good browsers. And if you have a hybrid model where you do some mowing with it, you can easily keep the vegetation in check year round. And they're safe for equipment. They're not going to kick up flying rocks the way the mowers would and break panels. So really serendipitous, kind of merging of two industries. A couple other things to note just about solar grazing and agrivoltaics, and I guess solar in general, right? If we think that solar to meet the net zero goals, the United States has to occupy at some point 10 million acres of land in the United States, 10 million acres of solar. Regardless of whether that's agricultural land or desert land, that's a ton of land to manage. So this industry really has to be good at managing land. And that's not really where their initial expertise comes from, right? It's energy production engineering. So there's a lot of regional diversity there, and there's diversity from site to site. If it was a row crop site before, that changes the entire composition of vegetation and how the site's managed. If it was really nice pasture land, that changes things. So there's a really big argument for having agriculturalists in the solar industry to help manage all this land, not just for the solar production, but also for the benefit of, communities and just the future use of the land. Cool. And then I'll just go through some of the benefits. You kind of got most of this from Sam, but the thing for the farmer and rancher really is mostly if you're raising a lamb crop or cattle or soybeans, whatever you make that year is based on what the market prices are. But with solar grazing, since you're replacing the mowing, you're paid a similar fee to what the mower gets paid. So you're getting a yearly fee usually per acre that's stable. You know what you're going to make each year. Your costs might vary a bit, but you have that income stream. And that's huge. It's a stable source of income. And if it's one part of your farm operation, it's a way to diversify your farm income. So if you have multiple streams from like lamb, say you're also raising some cattle on your farm, and then you're taking sheep to the solar sites, you have multiple streams of income. It helps to strengthen your farm against market crises and things like that. The other big one, and I want to highlight this because it kind of gets a little confusing when you start hearing about solar grazing agrivoltaics. The majority of sheep farmers who are grazing solar sites aren't actually the landowner. The landowner, leased out their land to solar. The solar company built a solar site on their land, is now managing it. And the sheep producer comes in from nearby, usually they're in the same community or the same area, and brings their sheep to manage vegetation. So it's a way for young farmers, new farmers, or even existing farmers and ranchers to access land. And that's a really big benefit for it. That land access is huge. And it's a way to expand your flock and business. And then again, community benefits, Sam went over these pretty well, but I want to emphasize that if you're mowing a site, you're not contributing to the local ag economy, but if you have sheep on a site, you are by buying feed, other sort of resources from the local community. Um, Real quick, because I know we don't have time for Q&A, I'm just going to highlight kind of how extensive is solar grazing in the United States. And solar grazing is the dominant form of agrivoltaics. It's really the only form of agrivoltaics that's widespread and scaled up. And as you can see in this map, there's about 130,000 acres of solar in the United States that are grazed by sheep. So that means, depending on what the numbers are today, because they change every month because new solar sites are being built, that's somewhere around 10% of all ground-mounted solar in the United States. Ground-mounted means it's not on a rooftop, or it's not, in some place with concrete underneath it. It's somewhere where it's on a piece of ground. Not all of that ground-mounted solar can be grazed. Some of it's in the desert or other random places like that. But that's a huge chunk of solar in the United States. One thing to note is in Texas, you have a ton of acres, or in the South, you have a ton of acres, about 87,000 acres. Texas is about 68,000 acres. If you look at the number of sites, Texas 109 sites, Midwest, where y'all are at, 148 sites. So what you're seeing is a lot bigger sites in Texas, like 1,000, 2,000 acres being grazed by sheep successfully. So it's scalable there, definitely. And because they've built a ton of big solar sites in Texas, that's why it's scaled up there. Also, there's a big sheep industry there. Ohio and other Midwestern states have a lot smaller sites. So you have plenty of sites being grazed, but smaller scale, like a few dozen acres. But those big sites are coming, like the Savion site that Sam referenced. There's several sites I know that have been permitted in Ohio that are expecting to have sheep grazing on that are over 1,000 acres or 800, 900 acres. So that's coming. It's just following the pace of solar development. To answer the question about, sheep industry, historically it's in the western part of the United States, especially the Intermountain West, where there is no solar or very little solar. But there are a lot of sheep producers in Ohio, and a lot of what ASGA does is workforce development, trying to train those sheep producers in order how to do the solar grazing on solar sites. And the hurdle for them primarily is going to be sourcing sheep and building up their flock, which is doable. You get sheep from different parts of the country. And the main issue there is probably capital expense, getting the money to buy sheep. But with these big solar contracts, if you get a contract with a solar company for a significantly large site, it's a significant source of income, which can sort of set you up well for your business operation. So again, it's scalable, and it's the only form of agrivoltaics that currently scales up. The experiments with cattle and crops are really exciting, and we got a really exciting future with that. But none of them, with the exception of the Madison Field site that Sam mentioned, have really scaled up to anything over what they would call utility scale, so over, a few acres or a few dozen acres. Um, and like those projects, many of those projects that are like that are supported by Department of Energy money or other types of research money behind it. So there's still that problem of like commercial success. Like solar sheep grazing is commercially and economically viable. We haven't found that sweet spot for cattle and crops yet. And the kind of last note I'll make before passing on to Q&A is, Sam brought this up too, and we get this question a lot. It's like, what is the sheep industry? It's kind of, a small part of the U.S. agricultural world. And if you watch that short documentary, you'll see the reason why we talk about it in regards to World War II and kind of taste after World War II. But what is really fascinating is two facts. One, about 70%, this last year was 73%, of all lamb eaten in the United States, so consumed in the US, is imported from Australia primarily and New Zealand and the UK a little bit too, and some other places. So that's a huge amount of agricultural product that's imported. It would be crazy. Any other agricultural industry in the US, like imagine soybeans, like 70% of it was imported. That'd be crazy, right? No one would let that happen. So there's a huge opportunity to retake domestic production or retake that number through domestic production of lamb, and solar grazing is really kind of the opportunity there. The other fact, which isn't mentioned on this slide, is that lamb demand in the United States is increasing, actually. And the reason it's increasing is from populations moving from the Middle East and Africa and other countries or other parts of the world to the United States. And they want a type of lamb, like a halal cut of lamb, which can't be frozen usually, so you can't really import it. So it has to be produced domestically. And that market's going up, and it's all over the country. Places like Detroit, Atlanta, pretty much anywhere, you're going to see a demand for it. And so even if, for example, you have a place like Kentucky or Ohio, and you're like, oh, there aren't a ton of lamb processing facilities there, and there's not historically a big like lamb industry. There is such a demand nationwide for this and regionally close enough that doesn't matter. That if you have a solar grazer take a contract for a 2,000-acre site in Ohio and he gets enough sheep, or he or she get enough sheep to graze that site, they're not going to have a problem finding a lamb market for the lambs they produce on that site. At least for the next, I'd imagine like 5 to 10 years at least. So that's like a really fortunate thing. It's, for some of these industries, like some of the crops industries, folks are barely making it, but there is actually increasing demand for lamb. The sheep industry on its own, if you're just raising sheep, isn't the most profitable, but if you combine the fee you get from solar grazing with the opportunities in the land market, you actually have a nice sustainable agricultural business, which is really cool. And yeah, there's other stuff to kind of talk about in terms of how it all works, which I'm happy to get into in Q&A, but really appreciate you guys inviting me and happy to answer any questions y'all have.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers. So I want to give a big round of applause to Kevin and Sam for our questions, just to keep it moderated well. Please raise your hand and then I will call on you so we don't have a bunch of people speaking at once.